I'd like to welcome Amir Kripper for this session where we look at urban landscape and how to bridge that gap between functionality and the aesthetics that we obviously need. Amir trained at the National University of Uruguay's architecture program before emigrating to the US in 2004. 2005, he earned his MBA from Columbia University and established Kripper Studio in 2011, working now with clients in Greater Boston and nationwide. So welcome, Amir. Thank you for joining us today. First of all, I'd like to look at the issue of urban landscape design and what you think are the crucial elements that you would need to consider when you're looking at such a project.
Well, those are, very exciting projects that they have a very large scale and involve multiple players. So I would say before building a building, what we need to build is consensus. Mm-hmm. By definition, a project of that scale has multiple players that have very diverse and in some cases, players that have different views, takes, and could be, pretty in opposite directions. They would have interested that they're not aligned. And as an architect, we need to come up with a vision. That's what we do. That somehow gives everyone on the table the idea and the opportunity to share and then build a common vision. So we take all of those opinions that in many cases are not aligned and create a vision that helps to build that consensus.
What do you find are the most common challenges that you come across when you're dealing with a community and their concerns?
Well, you have, there are three entities. You have the government, the city, the officials that have what they like to see. Sometimes you have a private entity, a developer, who has his own interest on the project. And then you have the community who protects their own interests. And then, as I was saying, building a vision that the three of them feel that they're gaining out of this. The three of them are in a win-win situation, as opposed to feeling that somebody is taking advantage or they have to give up too much to make this happen. So it's about having that moment where those three entities, the owner of the land, say, sometimes it's a developer, the city, and the neighbors, the abutters. Also, they are all coming to the table and they feel, hey, we are excited about this project.
And how would you go about looking at the area of land that is needed? What do you sort of take into consideration when you're dealing with a building that needs to be functional, but also needs to look glorious so that people actually want it in their community?
What I look is to find elements adjacent to the site that we can reuse as an inspiration. It's a huge help to move the project forward. Say, for instance, we take inspiration from existing materials. Just to give you an example, let's say that there are existing buildings that there are brick buildings. Just as an example. And then we can say, hey, you know what? We're gonna connect to the adjacent buildings and create a vision that it's very new and radical, but at the same time, it's grounded and rooted in the existing environment. That I found has been a huge help. So talking about adjacencies, so not to feel that we're imposing a building totally as an alien, as something that doesn't relate to a site, but looking for clues on the site. So I'm talking about materials, massing the site, how it relates to adjacent buildings. Obviously, if you have a neighborhood that it's 5 stories and you're coming up with something that it's 25, you're gonna find opposition. So can we also make sure that we relate to our neighbors and we're a good neighbor? What our energy efficiency, what our use of energy, we make sure that we have, we're not creating a situation where we're using too many resources. What our parking, we, create so much traffic that the, neighbors are also complaining about that. How we solve the issue of public transit. I would provide enough parking so we get the cars, if this is a large development, out of sight. And also we find a solution for those. Those are things that in general tend to create consensus. So massing, materials, transportation, those are concerns that the neighbors rightly so, have concerns and are kind of the first elements that they voice friction and say, hey, okay, you're developing this large project, but hey, what about, and everybody has a very own and very, I would say even selfish way of thinking. Hey, I've been parking in this, uh, site for a long time, or what about snow removal, all this, so everybody comes with its own, set of questions about the site. It could be very small and particular, or much larger, like I was saying, energy consumption, pollution, use of traffic, the subway system, the school system. If it's a large, development, there are other concerns. You're building this development and you're going to bring, 200 families, but how this is going to affect the public school system? In America, it's a big issue, a big deal, when there are very large developments, and how they affect the school system that is attached to the local community.
Okay, so communication is absolutely critical here.
That's kind of the number one. And also, in our experience, being very upfront about it and being proactive. So let's say there is a development that's coming up, and then reaching all the abutters and say, hey, listen, we're going to have a presentation even before it's required, to say, hey, this is what we are thinking, and invite them to a table. What do you think? And that immediately creates a change of dynamics when you say, instead of them being reactive and passive and sometimes upset that this is happening without their knowing, you say, hey, we're thinking about this. We'd like to have your input. That's amazing, the way the results I've seen when you kind of change the dynamics and you say, hey, we'd like to have your opinion. Sometimes it's, just the fact that they're invited to voice their opinion, the conversation and the tone changes.
But they're not having something imposed on them, although they're being
involved
in the project. So it's a partnership, then it becomes.
It's a partnership. And you have to think that, humans, by definition, also, we don't like to change. Things are the way they are. Like, hey, I remember working in New York on a project on a high rise. This is a long time ago. And there was a large site for a tower in New York. Everybody was excited. And there was this community meeting. And then this person comes and says, hey, but this is going to block my view of my apartment. I had this view for 30 years. And how do you talk to somebody like that, his concern is legit, this is his view, but then for the developer, this is a site that, it's going to be 35 stories. So what are the dynamics at play there? And how do you say, well, this building here, it's actually going to be beautiful. Look at this. And you're going to have a different view that probably it's not the same you used to have. So engaging in those conversations are part of the things that we have to do.
What would you say has been your sort of proudest achievement in this arena? What challenge have you overcome and then got that building finally through?
Like a few weeks ago, we had this meeting for a development. It was the third meeting with abutters. So, and this comes back to my first point. So it was the third time because the first two times were not successful, I have to say. So we had to meet for a third time. And the process was that it was very hard to get this project from the city approval if we had the neighbors, the abutters, against it. So we went for the third time. And interestingly enough, the first two times, most of the people who were against it, they didn't even see the project. They were just against a project. So the third time, what happened is that we met and we did similar to what I was describing. Says, hey, this is a project. And, we met them, we engaged them, and surprisingly, they loved the project. Just nobody had the chance to explain them, to share them, and engage them. And the project was almost anonymously approved and have the full support of the community, simply because we were able to engage them and have a conversation, invite them to a table, ask them for the feedback.
And was it a residential building, or was it?
Yeah, it was a multifamily. It was a multifamily in a zone that requires approval for different issues the site wanted, density, and now it's finally moving forward. But it took 3 times, and it took a lot of effort. And we learned also from that people want to be heard. Some people are very sensitive about development, about larger projects. They like the way things used to be, especially, older people who have a mindset for, we like the way things used to be and we don't want any change.
I think there's a level of nervousness, isn't there, about once
Yes.
you lose control, once you give permission to somebody to change something, then it does become something that is out of control for them. So would be a
And
concern
also,
if
and
it's
also,
people in their environment.
and people are suspicious, you know, like what's going to happen here?
Yeah,
Number one,
yeah,
like, and how this affects me.
yeah, exactly. We're all the same.
Yeah.
So, what what do you enjoy about this particular element? Do you enjoy the fact that you are making use of land that is possibly has been left, hasn't been used, and you're now bringing it back into
Yeah,
life?
we enjoy that a lot. The other thing that we do in our office that it's something that I'm proud of and I enjoy the most, perhaps, is taking advantage of older buildings, sometimes
Mm,
even landmarks that they've been abandoned or in really bad shape for many, you know, in sometimes decades, and bringing those to life. This is something that we develop quite an expertise. You know, these are buildings and sometimes residential, sometimes it's office. That they in sometimes have been, you know, abandoned or, you know, being used under their possibilities. So recover them is something that it's very rewarding when you take those buildings that they have been in the way they are and neglected for 50
mm.
years, 60 years, sometimes even more, and then strip down all these layers of plaster and, you know, ceiling tiles and you name it, and then peeling this off and showcasing their real beauty. It's something that we are proud of, and it's very rewarding.
And do you go out and find those buildings, or do people come to you once they found one?
We were lucky that, you know, we did a few early on in our careers, and now people are looking for us when they have a building that it's like that. That, hey, you know that you did this, this, and this. Would you be interested in looking at this project? And I have to say that they are challenging projects for an architect because requires a certain discipline and a constraint of your ego.
Mm-hmm.
Usually, you know, as architects, we want to make a mark. In this kind of projects, it's you have to basically curb yourself and say, hey, it's about removing and exposing as opposed to adding so much, and being patient and being hopeful that, you know, as you start the process, that inner beauty existing appears.
But also there must be quite a sense of reward in the fact that you are allowing a building to continue to live, albeit in possibly a slightly different format, but you are bringing it back to life.
Yes, it's extremely rewarding. You know, there is something also about when you talk to the new tenants, the people or the new people who are living in the building, they says, oh, I didn't know this, or even the neighbors, you know, they're so happy really with a building like that that has been dilapidated and you bring back to life. So you feel like you're doing a community service in a way, which is just amazing.
Mm. Have you ever found any hidden treasure in any of these old buildings?
We
Hidden
found,
surprises, perhaps?
let me think about it. We found things that, not gold. You know what? Funny enough, this is a funny story. A few years ago, we were renovating a Victorian mansion, a residence, very large, that was totally, you know, had to be renovated. And when the builder opens up the attic, he found a bag with coins, old coins.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden he calls me and says, look at this. And it's an old bag, has been there perhaps since the 30s or 40s. We don't know, but for the coins we could say. And he thought that, you know, it was a fortune. And everybody says, well, you know what? You're going to be, you know, rich. Needless to say, it wasn't worth anything.
Okay. But for those few moments, there was joy, I imagine, in that building.
We were jealous that he found that in the attic. So you came up to the attic, there was a little door, and then in an unfinished crawl space, he was this bag with old coins. It wasn't worth much. Okay. No, but in all seriousness, what we found that we restored are, it's fascinating, but the brick detailing that we found, arches that were covered with no reason, that we were able to bring back, masonry details, moldings like that, finishes that's the kind of thing. And also space that has been unused for some reason. You know, you open up space and then you almost create square footage in a way. You know, you create rooms that they were neglected, but by the way they were used, they were not functional. So I would say those three things, like hidden detailings on the masonry arches that they were, you know, in the 80s, they found that there was no point for them. So we were able to do that in a building that it's a Sears Crescent, the oldest commercial building in Boston. We were lucky to design it and bring that back to life. It was covered in all those amazing brick detailing that was totally neglected and covered with you know, ceiling tiles and that kind of finishes from the 80s. That was horrible, by the way. So that's one thing. Rooms when they're with you know, with better planning. And then some finishes that are quite beautiful, tiling that you know, if they're in good shape, we were able to recover in some projects.
So the reward, I guess, of making a functional building, bringing it back to life, but then perhaps revisiting some of the glorious aesthetics of the era that it was built in and re-embellishing them, I suppose, to a certain extent, to make them then, you know, live on in this era for however long.
Absolutely. And interestingly enough, the users respond very well. Like people have appreciation and they're looking for those gems, you know. It's like in this world that everything is so generic and then homogeneous, there is a certain kind of people who have an appreciation for those details and for people who took care of the buildings, and it creates value, interestingly enough. Like real value is either in the sense of, you know, companies are looking, they don't want just a space, they want a space that speaks to themselves, that has a history. So those spaces are very desirable.
They have a sort of level of authenticity, don't they?
Yeah,
that's been sort of reinforced, I guess, once you've been in there and made a building functional as well as beautiful, I think is what we're saying. So
people are driven towards, or let me put it this way, there is a certain number of people who have an appreciation and will value that way more than a generic office building or a house or residence. That there is a certain kind of people who have an appreciation for those properties.
It's a certain atmosphere, I think, you get within a building that has been around for many years. Something is special, isn't it? So, and I think if that can be preserved, it's a very great reward to do that. So, you've obviously worked on multiple projects. Would you say there's a favorite one that you feel?
This is like asking about your favorite son.
Perhaps you have more than one, but do you have one that really stands out? I guess that perhaps was, you know, a real challenge to you, that when you finally finished and gave the keys to somebody, you thought, yeah, I've done that.
Oh, sorry. Let me think for a second about this. I would say that every project comes with a set of constraints that makes it very challenging, and it's hard to pick one like that. Honestly, even if I try, I'm having a hard time just picturing one.
Okay,
every project comes with a set of constraints that makes it unique. When I find that we do a better job, actually, is when there are multiple constraints like that. Those are the projects that are more rewarding too. When you're able to, you know, pass constraints that come from building code, from an existing building, from sometimes it's a budget that's very tight. Sometimes it's a condition with adjacencies. Sometimes the program is complicated by nature because there are many different components and the client itself has many different players. So when you come up with all that and at the end you found a solution, a project, and everything goes well, it's rewarding. Construction in itself, it's a project, you know, construction, you know, it comes with its own challenges, especially when we're dealing, as we were saying, with an existing building, by the way. It's much more complicated. There are unforeseen conditions.
Yeah, I imagine so. Unforeseen surprises, definitely, I would think.
Yeah.
So once you've got these glorious visions of buildings up and running, how do you use Instagram to promote what you've done? I know we talked about it earlier, and you said you use it for sort of drawings and details, and possibly for research as well. What would bring you to sort of thinking that's a good Instagrammable image that holds your feelings and takes them out to the audience?
I would say we use Instagram for three things. One is to show the process. I think if people are interested in seeing the process, like you could see amazing photographs, either for magazine publications, books, but the process is something that normally people are not exposed to.
Mm-hmm.
And the process could come from a drawing, from a sketch, even from a site visit, like something like behind the scenes. I think it's interesting. I found it interesting. And I think people will find that interesting too. Like, you know, professional photographs are beautiful and we all know them. But the behind the scenes has a different flavor, and Instagram being such a fun and almost light medium allows for that. That you can say, hey, listen, I'm walking through a new project or a potential new project, even not even having a commission. But this is fascinating because I found this is whatever that is, that I think it's interesting. So there is something about this immediate
I suppose it's the narrative, isn't it, of the story?
Yeah, the story. Yeah.
The beginning and then the middle and the process.
Yeah, so you have, you know, perhaps it's, you know, talking about storytelling and how Instagram could serve as a device for storytelling. You could show at the very beginning, even visiting the site, the process, and the process through sketches, research, materials. And then maybe at the end, yes, you use a few of the final images, the more curated, professional, also as part of that.
And do you find that it's a useful way of communicating in the office what's going on?
Yeah, you know, people like to engage with Instagram. People are drawn to that lightly, right? This is not something that it's one of the main things, but among many other outlets that we have, would be one. Like in a way.
What other sort of outlets would you use to promote your work?
So there are other venues, like we were saying, like the more traditional publications. Maybe it's a newsletter or other. It's like there's so many other outlets. This would be one of them. But right. I think the beauty would be that those posts could be very light. You know, they don't need so much editing and so forth. It's a little more, I want to say, casual.
It gives, I guess, an immediate flavor, doesn't it, of what you're talking about and what you're dealing with. So, well, I'd like to say thank you very much for sharing your time today. And I'm sorry the bag of gold coins didn't make you into a millionaire, but it was probably a very nice surprise on the day.
Yes, it was.
Yeah. So thank you for your time.
Thank you for having us.
All the best.
Bye.
Thank you very much, Amir.